I'm Tricia Tuttle. I'm the director of London Film Festival, and it's such a pleasure to have the producers of our closing film, Ammonite, Fodhla Cronin O'Reilly and Iain Canning. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you so much for allowing us to screen Ammonite as our closing film. It's great. We're going out all across the UK, around 360 cinemas, which is terrific. So people are going to be joining us to watch this gorgeous film. It's directed and written by Francis Lee, whom many people will know from his gorgeous debut, God's Own Country. Can you talk about how you started working with Francis and together on this project?
Yeah, I'd seen God's Own Country, I guess, after all of the amazing reviews that had come out of Sundance when he premiered there, and the film was screened at the BFI for the producing community, and I sort of was just completely blown away by it and thought, my God, we really have to work with this filmmaker. He's got such a rich and distinctive voice, and we stalked him until he eventually said that he would develop something with us, and that ended up turning into Ammonite.
Great. And in the story of Mary Anning, can you talk a little bit about why you were all interested in telling this story or exploring something through her life?
So Francis had was actually buying a fossil for a loved one, and he decided he was looking into it and researching it, and the name Mary Anning kept on coming up. And I think over recent years, Mary Anning started to be taught in schools as a figure of history that should be remembered and studied. But for us, it was a sort of new person from history that we hadn't come across. So he started doing the research. We saw how incredible her achievements were and how they'd been completely subjugated and sort of pushed down by the men of the world and the time. And it just felt like such a unique story for Francis to be able to navigate in his own way and reimagine in a queer way that would also respect Mary Anning's work, but also tell a very Francis Lee film.
It's not a biopic. It's obviously based on her life. But what were the sort of research tools that Francis used to develop the script?
He went down to Lyme Regis, did a lot of research, talked to a lot of groups down there about her history. Obviously, in terms of the National Museum, was interested in that. So he sort of really went into the details and in many ways, the undiscovered story of her.
And Fodhla, it's such a beautiful film, and like God's Own Country, the sort of tangible, tactile sense of place is so important to the film. Can you talk about shooting in Lyme Regis? What were the pleasures and challenges of that?
Yeah, so it was extremely important to Francis to shoot in the town that Mary grew up. Unfortunately, we couldn't shoot in her home because it's now been transformed into the Lyme Regis Museum. But we shot in a fossil shop just down the road, and we shot on the beaches that she actually fossiled. It was a real pleasure to be in Lyme because the local residents were extremely welcoming and helpful. In terms of challenges, the Jurassic Coast in the south of England is, the reason it's such a prime location for fossils because of its geology. It's made up of mostly limestone and shale, but as a consequence, the coastline is changing quite dramatically. Erosion is a major problem. So on certain days, we would block out scenes to happen on one particular part of the beach, and the next day it would just be completely gone. So we would have to recalibrate. So yeah, the erosion down there is moving pretty fast. So that was one of the biggest challenges of shooting around that area.
You also, I've read you've shot the film chronologically. Was that why chronologically?
I think it's something that Francis did on God's Own Country that just he felt was such a huge benefit to the actors in terms of evolving the story out and finding those story beats without predicting 2 weeks later how their character will evolve and change. And so we really wanted to deliver on that sort of integral part of his filmmaking style. And it was, I think, even probably something relatively new for Kate and Saoirse, who'd been on so many film sets, but sort of hadn't had a sort of environment where they'd taken this approach for a little while. So it was something we really wanted to have in place for Francis so that he could do his best work.
And Fodhla, was that a challenge for you guys on set?
Shooting chronologically, yes, always a challenge, always. But we had a super smart team. Our first AD was really clever in how he scheduled it, and everyone was so accommodating to make that a reality.
And Iain, you mentioned it sort of adds to performance as well too, and they are two incredible performances at the heart of the film from Saoirse and Kate. Iain, can you talk about casting them? How did they come on board?
Yeah, it was sort of a really wonderful thing in many ways for us at Seesaw, because Francis did such an incredible job on God's Own Country, but I think working with him, we knew the anticipation from the sort of acting community about wanting to work with him on his next film, and we were pursued once the script existed and was in my inbox. We were pursued by lots of people, but Kate Winslet was always at the top of that list. It always felt like such an opportunity for her to shoot in the UK, to sort of go through Francis's process to bring us a performance which was so sort of rich and earthy and raw, and luckily within the space of 4 hours from getting the script, she read it and wanted to do it. So, I mean, there's a lot of time I think producers say it was sort of a dream come true, but it doesn't ever happen like that. So it was to Francis's credit that Kate had seen God's Own Country, that she was interested in this role, and that he had written something that connected with her and felt that she could do beautifully.
And Fodhla, that there's just there's a sense of intimacy in the film that I think could only come by creating a special kind of set atmosphere. What was that like? How did Francis sort of protect the actors so that you could get that intimacy?
Well, Francis is a actor's director. The cast is his priority, and he had spent months before shooting working with Kate and Saoirse, developing the characters together, and during the course of that time they got to know each other and build a trust. So it was there while we were shooting, and Kate and Saoirse relied on each other, and there was immense trust between the two of them as well, especially when we were shooting the more intimate scenes, and they felt as if they could take control, and yeah, they were very comfortable shooting those scenes because they were with each other.
Great. And was it, so this is an independent film that you're working with sort of two of Hollywood's biggest stars. Were there any sort of challenges around that?
Yes, the sort of word Hollywood film was thrown about by the press, and before Francis had shot a frame, there were articles in various newspapers talking about it, and we just hadn't experienced a sort of arrival of paparazzi in the way that we did on Ammonite, and it meant that we were only really caring about one lens, where it seemed like we had about 25 lenses per scene. And it's such a complicated thing because people are getting moments from the film, but they're not in the film when they're seeing those moments online. But it is the nature of the business and the nature of having these two incredible actors and stars. But it definitely meant that when we got to moments in the film which were special and intimate and needed no distraction, we had to go about changing locations at the last minute to try and find some quiet space for those performances to exist without without a lens sort of zoom.
Yeah, in one instance we had a scene where it was a very delicate scene that required maybe some nudity. We didn't know at the time, and we needed to figure out how to safeguard Kate and Saoirse while we were shooting that. So we sourced a secret beach that could only be accessed by water. Didn't tell our cast, our crew, where it was, and then just have everybody arrive. So there was no way the paparazzi could track us down, and they wouldn't be able to access it anyway because they didn't have boats to hand. But it was sort of fun figuring that out.
Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you again so much. We can't wait for people to see Ammonite. And thank you so much to Lionsgate and to you both and to Frances for being the closing film of the 64th BFI London Film Festival. Thanks both.
Thank you.
Thank you.